It started like one of those ordinary post-game media sessions that usually disappear within a news cycle. A few questions. A few polished answers. Another win added to the record. But this time, people started replaying the clips. Not because of something explosive. Not because anyone called somebody out. The attention came from something harder to explain, the feeling that there was more being said than what actually came out of the microphone. Aliyah Boston sat there calm, measured, professional. No dramatic headlines. No emotional outburst. Just a franchise cornerstone answering questions the way stars are expected to. And yet the conversation started almost immediately. Because when she talked about execution, when she mentioned defensive lapses, when she emphasized staying together and remaining disciplined through difficult stretches, some people didn't hear routine athlete language. They heard concern. Not concern directed at one person. Not blame. But concern about a team that still doesn't fully look comfortable despite collecting wins. That's where this story really begins. The Indiana Fever entered the season carrying expectations few teams in the league have ever experienced. Every game suddenly became bigger. Every rotation became a debate. Every adjustment became part of a larger conversation. And when expectations rise that fast, people stop listening only to what players say. They start watching pauses. They start noticing wording. They start reading body language. So when Boston talked about controllable mistakes and moments where opponents capitalized, some heard a veteran voice trying to keep standards high. Others heard something else entirely. Not frustration. Not conflict. But maybe the first public hint that inside Indiana, everyone knows there's still another level this team hasn't reached yet. That's the strange part about what's happening in Indiana right now. They're winning. And somehow, people still walk away feeling uneasy. Normally, wins erase questions. They quiet criticism. They create patience. But with this Fever team, every close finish seems to create even more conversation than the result itself. Because expectations changed the second this roster started coming together. You have Caitlin Clark, arguably the most talked about basketball player entering the league in years. You have Aliyah Boston, a former #1 pick and foundational presence. You have Kelsey Mitchell, someone who stayed through difficult seasons waiting for meaningful basketball to arrive. On paper, that combination sounds dangerous. So when games become tighter than expected, people notice. It isn't necessarily about margin of victory. It's about the feeling. Fans watch stretches where Indiana looks unstoppable, fast pace, ball movement, momentum everywhere, and then suddenly everything slows down. Possessions become harder. Defensive breakdowns appear. Opponents hang around longer than expected. And once that happens, something shifts emotionally. Instead of enjoying the win, people start asking why the game became stressful in the first place. That's where expectations become complicated. A rebuilding team survives ugly wins and calls it growth. A team expected to contend gets judged differently. Every fourth quarter collapse becomes evidence. Every blown lead becomes a pattern. Every adjustment becomes a debate. And maybe that's why comments from players have started drawing so much attention. When Boston talks about execution and discipline, or when Kelsey Mitchell emphasizes avoiding mistakes that let teams back into games, people aren't hearing panic. They're hearing standards. Because teams with talent don't usually measure themselves by whether they survived. They measure themselves by whether they controlled the game. Right now, Indiana keeps finding ways to finish. But the bigger question floating around the season isn't whether they can win. It's why so many of those wins still feel unfinished. And eventually, every conversation like this ends up in the same place. The coach. Not because coaching is always the problem, but because when expectations rise, leadership naturally becomes the center of the spotlight. Stephanie White arrived with credibility, experience, and a reputation for building disciplined basketball teams. The expectation wasn't simply that Indiana would improve. The expectation was structure. Identity. A system that could take all this talent and turn it into something sustainable. That's why the conversation has become so intense. Because when people watch Indiana, they see flashes that look unstoppable. Then they see stretches that feel disconnected. One possession looks smooth and intentional. The next feels rushed. One quarter looks like a contender. The next raises questions. And that contrast has become the fuel behind growing public debate. Some fans believe the team simply needs time, that integrating star talent, adjusting roles, and building chemistry isn't something that happens overnight. Others look at the same games and wonder whether adjustments are happening fast enough. When offensive possessions stall, people ask whether the system is creating enough easy opportunities. When opponents go on runs, people question defensive responses. When close games become recurring themes, coaching decisions naturally become part of the discussion. That doesn't mean criticism equals failure. Sometimes pressure is just the reality of leading a team people suddenly expect to win immediately. But there's another layer that makes Indiana different. This isn't a quiet rebuild anymore. Every substitution gets analyzed. Every timeout becomes a headline. Every quote gets interpreted. And when that environment exists, coaches often become symbols for something bigger than strategy. They become symbols for whether a team is progressing fast enough. That's the difficult position Stephanie White finds herself in. Not managing a roster that lacks talent. Managing a roster where expectations accelerated faster than the timeline. And in moments like that, even wins don't always stop people from asking whether there's another version of this team still waiting to appear. This is where the conversation becomes more interesting, because neither Aliyah Boston nor Kelsey Mitchell said anything explosive. That's exactly why people paid attention. Professional athletes rarely communicate frustration directly, especially publicly. The language is usually controlled, measured, and centered on solutions instead of blame. But that doesn't mean there's nothing inside the message. When Boston talked about execution and mentioned defensive, controllable things, staying sharp, staying connected, making sure mistakes don't repeat, that's leadership language. Not excuses. Not finger-pointing. Leadership. Because great players understand something important. Once a team reaches a certain level of expectation, losing focus becomes more dangerous than lacking talent. Then came another phrase that stood out, staying together. At first glance, it sounds ordinary. Teams say that constantly. But staying together usually becomes a bigger topic when games start becoming emotionally expensive. Close finishes do that. Momentum swings do that. Expectations do that. You start hearing language about trust, composure, discipline, and responding correctly when pressure rises. Then Kelsey Mitchell added something that completed the picture. Her emphasis wasn't on panic. It was discipline. Not fouling. Not allowing opponents back into games. Not getting comfortable. That's veteran language. Because veterans know momentum doesn't disappear overnight. It leaks out possession by possession. One unnecessary foul. One missed rotation. One possession without communication. Suddenly a controlled game becomes chaotic. What both players seemed to emphasize wasn't that the Fever are broken. It sounded more like something else. A team that knows it's capable of more. A team trying to protect standards while still building consistency. And sometimes those are the most fascinating teams to watch, because they aren't fighting for belief. They're fighting to match the level everyone already expects from them. And this is the part that makes Indiana different from almost every other team in the league. Because no matter what the conversation starts as, eventually it circles back to one name. Caitlin Clark. Not because she's responsible for every outcome. Not because every storyline should revolve around her. But because attention changes everything. The moment Clark arrived, the Fever stopped being evaluated like a normal developing team. Expectations accelerated overnight. National conversations appeared. Every game became a headline. Every adjustment became a talking point. That kind of attention creates something difficult to manage. People stop asking whether the team is improving. They start asking who the team belongs to. And that's where perception starts moving faster than reality. When Clark has a huge game, people talk about building around her. When Aliyah Boston dominates inside, people talk about balance. When Kelsey Mitchell takes over late, people debate hierarchy. Suddenly normal basketball decisions become framed as statements. Who gets the ball? Who closes? Whose strengths shape the offense? Who becomes the identity? That pressure can create narratives that don't always reflect what's actually happening inside the building. Because teams rarely succeed by choosing one star and minimizing everyone else. Especially teams trying to win at the highest level. The challenge becomes building something where talent amplifies talent. Clark's presence raises expectations because she represents possibility. Boston represents stability. Mitchell represents experience. And together, that combination creates a strange dynamic. Success feels mandatory. Growth feels too slow. Patience disappears. So when people hear comments about execution, discipline, and staying together, some immediately connect those conversations to bigger questions about direction and identity. But identity isn't always built through dramatic decisions. Sometimes it's built through repetition, trust, adjustments, and eventually reaching the moment where nobody is asking who the franchise belongs to anymore, because the basketball starts answering the question on its own. There's a moment almost every competitive team reaches during a long season. It doesn't show up in the standings. It doesn't show up in the box score. It shows up in the language. That's when phrases start appearing. Stay connected. Trust each other. Stay disciplined. Keep fighting. And sometimes, teams create a slogan. Not because things are falling apart, but because they're trying to hold on to something while figuring things out. That's why moments like closing the fist caught people's attention. Not because a phrase means something is wrong. Teams create internal language all the time. But those moments often appear when emotions are running high and results aren't matching expectations consistently. You start hearing players talk less about schemes and more about togetherness. Less about tactics and more about response. That shift can mean something simple. The team is trying to protect confidence while searching for consistency. Because basketball gets emotional faster than people realize. One blown lead becomes two. One difficult finish becomes a pattern. Film sessions become longer. Conversations become more repetitive. Players start feeling the weight of expectations while still trying to improve. And for teams with real ambitions, that emotional pressure can become exhausting. That's where leadership matters most. Not when everything works. When it doesn't. Because resilience isn't proving you never struggle. It's showing that frustration doesn't become division. Right now, Indiana doesn't look like a team giving up. If anything, they look like a team trying to solve something in real time. And sometimes those stretches become defining moments, because the teams that eventually break through are often the ones that learn how to stay connected before they finally figure everything else out. And maybe that's why this stretch feels bigger than a few close games. Because seasons rarely get remembered for ordinary nights. They get remembered for moments where expectations collided with reality. That's where Indiana seems to be standing right now. Not in crisis. Not in chaos. But at a point where every game feels like it's revealing something. Can the talent become consistent? Can the adjustments come quickly enough? Can trust survive the pressure that comes with attention and expectations? Those questions don't get answered in interviews. They get answered over time. Through possessions. Through difficult fourth quarters. Through the moments where teams either tighten up or finally settle into who they are. And that's what makes this next phase so interesting.